It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And surprise, surprise, it's Hodgepodge Day, and boy, we have a big list of questions. But first, let's check in with my partner here and see how his week has been.
Oh, well, acceptable.
Last time we talked, it was great. What
I don't know
changed?
about great. It's good. My mom's visiting. I got a ton of congestion because I've been eating stuff I shouldn't probably be eating. Thank God my girlfriend's out of town because I've been eating a lot of meat and I normally don't. But it's and the air quality is a little better, but it started bad, so I think that's part of it too. So I have I apologize to anybody if I cough during the show or make any disgusting mucus noise with my lungs because they are congested.
Well, we will try and power through and get all this information out in an expedient fashion. So right off the bat, we're going to talk about DAZN because last week DAZN's financials went public, and we have seen their financials in the past, but this set was a little bit different. Can you break down first what's different about these financials in comparison with the ones that you've gotten in the past?
Well, where we get it from is, thank God, UK Company House. They post their finances to that. And this time around, DAZN showed that, I'm trying to say this politely. They're still a big money losing operation. They reported it goes through last year, so 2023, even though the year before, we always get a year out of date. So we saw an increase in revenue. They posted an increase in revenue from 2.2 billion roughly in 2022 to 2.9 billion. So a big increase in revenue. But their losses continue to grow from 1.2 billion in 2022 to 1.4 billion, actually a little over 1.4 billion in 2023. So that's what their base financials look like. We get a little into it, but there's some details we got that sources reported apparently to I think SB Sports Business Journal, that their subscriptions, and this is the part that's I find somewhat alarming, they're subscription based. They have 300 monthly customers, but they're subscription based platform, and they only have about 20 million paying subscribers. That's terrible. And so you look at those finances, you look at the losses. It's we can get in further details in some of the other information we have about how they're going to grow next year. They talk about and stuff. They have this plan for growth, but it does not look like it's a tremendous business. Things are not, it's not gravy over there right now.
Let's talk about EBITDA, because they're using that as a gauge now, right?
Well, they do. They break it out. I think you got this from our friend Fred, because he likes to point out when EBITDA, as I pronounce it, EBITDA. Some people do say EBITDA.
EBITDA, however you say
it works either way. I've heard it both ways, and I've had a whole discussion with Cardiff Garcia and other people. So it's not like anybody has to take shame, because everybody was using a different pronunciation. People that, that they report on business journals that use different pronunciations, but it stands for earnings before interest, taxation, depreciation, amortization. They broke that up, but they still had their losses as like profit levels. So I don't think it was they did get group losses before taxes, group losses for the year, which is basically their losses, it's the same as negative net income. So even though they broke out EBITDA, which Fred likes to point out is what scoundrels use to hide all their actual finances, they still reported their losses. So I don't put too much into that, because they're losing money still. It's not. We've talked about the problem with DAZN in America, but even overseas, they seem to be running into some problems. And our whole pledge now to investors that they're the Spotify of sports. That doesn't fill me with hope. I got to be honest with that. That's nothing that gets me excited about the future of the company.
Now, you mentioned the subscriber base earlier. 20 million, 300 million. Can you run that down for us a little bit more right here?
Well, yeah, this is somewhat alarming because they're a subscription model. Now, we know Netflix has like 380 million subscribers worldwide, maybe over 400 million. I can't remember their last report, but it was a huge number of subscribers, like 90 million in the United States. They keep growing, and here they have. And this is the part that's somewhat confusing because they don't have details of this. And maybe I missed this, and maybe someone can contact me and inform me why this says 300 million users, but only 20 million subscribers. My understanding, they have a subscription model all over the world for most of their territories. So what is a user that's not a subscriber, right? Who's using it for free? So who are these people? I don't know how people are getting it for free. What's the point of someone that's a user? And only 20 million subscribers is just such a small number of subscribers to the platform worldwide, and especially considering that when they launched in the United States, remember when they announced Canelo Alvarez and they're going to have these big fights, their model in the United States, they had up to like 1 million subscribers pretty quickly, and so there's some hope that they can get other sports and overseas they could do better, that they might have a viable business model, but you look at it now in the United States, it's half. I very much doubt it's half. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a quarter of the number of subscribers now, like 250,000 compared to 1 million. And that is just greatly reduced number of subscribers. I know going into next year, they're going to lower the subscription rate in the United States again. So hopefully they'll grow those numbers. But I have to say it has made no dent in the United States. And that's been terrible for boxing as we follow, or any MMA on that platform, or whoever's on that platform, because they're out of sight, out of mind. They're just the American public is not aware of what's happening on DAZN, which I believe is pronounced DAZN because that still hasn't been decided.
Okay, I have a question.
Fire away.
With all this problems and everything, would you say that part of the issue with their subscriber base basically stagnating all of this time comes from the fact that they promised never to charge for pay-per-views, and they promised that their model would just basically eradicate pay-per-views across the board, because who could compete with free big fights? But that wasn't the case. And inside of, I think it was 16 months or 18 months, they were holding pay-per-views.
I mean, that's a big part of it. They pledged we're going to have no pay-per-views. People were signing on for $100 a year for the total year if they didn't do the monthly subscription. And they were promised, for this rate, you're going to get big fights. And at the beginning, they had, Canelo Alvarez came on. The idea was, hey, you signed Canelo, you signed Triple G. We're going to have that fight for sure very soon when it's relevant. We have Anthony Joshua coming over from the UK. We're going to build up big pay-per-views. At the very beginning, it did look like they were going to give you pay-per-view caliber fights for the amount you're paying. And then what happens? Canelo gets upset when the pandemic hits, because the Golden Boy basically was misleading him. He leaves. They lose Canelo. They have no Joshua at that point, lost the title, and then he regained it in a big fight with Andy Ruiz. But they didn't have the big fights really anymore. And so, I mean, it's pretty simple story. Is you can't promise people that this new thing is going to deliver huge fights and then take it away, and then also take away the big fighters in the American market. And, Joshua's a big fighter, but he's a big fighter in the UK. He hadn't become they were trying to build him up in a star, and he lost to Ruiz when he came to New York, but he hadn't become a star in the United States. And so they were not offering top-notch fights in the United States. You just cannot get the American fan base in boxing, as they follow specific fighters, and they didn't have any of those fighters that were going to draw in the United States, and they weren't doing the big pay-per-view fights. So yes, I would say that's a big part. You can't up the cost while decreasing the value that you're giving people.
I was going to ask you why their losses have been so dramatic, but we've basically been hashing that out. So what I will ask you about is how much money has been pumped into DAZN so far in relation to those heavy losses? And give us the numbers on the losses, because we haven't revealed that part.
Well, the total losses, I believe it's up to this year. Len Blavatnik, sorry, Russian name. Len Blavatnik, he pumped in on over 800 million more into it. He's basically been keeping it afloat with his own finances. He's invested. They put in something like almost $7 billion now, 6.7 billion worth of money into it,
Lord.
which, I mean, Netflix put tons of money. The problem is the growth rate in revenue just does not show it there, right? Does not show growth. And even though they've been putting tons of money in boxing and probably losing money on the boxing venture, it's the other sports acquisitions that they're paying out that have been the money loser because they're not drawing the subscribers to pay for it. And now next year they claim, because they did acquire Foxtel in Australia, a pay television company, they claim with the revenues from that and additional revenues as they're growing, they're going to surpass $6 billion in revenue next year. And that might be true. They might do $6 billion in revenue, but the question again is, will you decrease the losses? Because now you're acquiring another entity that probably, I don't know what their finances looks like at Foxtel. I don't know what their margins are. If they're a money generator or a money loser, you could just be burning through more cash. So but they're also putting money into the rights of FIFA. So they're going to spend more money. They expect to grow and become more profitable. But I'm going to wait and see on that, because so far all their attempts have not really led to anything that look like it just has not been successful. Whatever they've tried has not been working. Let's put it that way.
What do their finances tell us about how boxing is doing on DAZN?
Well, that's interesting, because they do file and they do give us some boxing information in the filings, because they are partners with Matchroom on an entity called two entities, Matchroom USA LLC and Matchroom Global LLC. And so we do get some details from that. And what we see is we can see that their revenues from Matchroom USA LLC went from $135.9 million in 2022. Again, this is for the 2023 year, the most recent. And then they dropped from 135.9 in 2022 to only 41.8 million of total revenue in 2023. So we are talking about almost $95 million decrease in total revenue. And we can also see what they did in their license fees for that, because they also list elsewhere the licensing fee, and their licensing fee went from something like 94 million, I believe it is, down to 27 million. So they had a tremendous drop in their license fee. Yeah, 94.5 million in Matchroom license fees to 27 million. And so you look at that, and this is just for Matchroom USA. Matchroom Global is, basically a non-entity of just a couple million, although they did decrease from, I think, 2.5 in license fee to $500,600,000 last year in 2023, I should note. But you look at that and it becomes, to me, it's obvious what the decrease is in Matchroom. The decrease is in Matchroom USA is that decrease in licensing fees, broadcast license fee, and total revenue. That's pretty much explained by Canelo no longer fighting on DAZN with Matchroom, right? Mm-hmm. He had the Bivol fight and the Triple G fight in 2022. Then he came back for that Ryder fight, which was a much smaller event. And then you look at the total amount that supposedly they paid Canelo. We know from the lawsuit that he had with Golden Boy that his original contract would pay him on a typical fight $35 million from broadcast fees, and then as a guarantee plus then he got a percentage of the gate, and he had to keep the sponsorship. And then against Triple G, he was supposed to get $60 million. Well, you add that up, and that decrease of from $135 million to, what was it? I said 41, $95 million decrease. Well, that probably fits in that ballpark. Around $100 million of expenses from those two events would do it. So, then you add the Ryder of what they paid Ryder back in, so that would be the difference. But that's what I would expect is the cause is that they paid a ton of money out. They were putting money into the Matchroom because they had Canelo. When they lost him, they did not put the money back in. Now it'll be interesting when we look at Matchroom Boxing UK Limited, UK, which is the parent company, when we look at them and see their finances, because the interesting thing is the Matchroom, this is where it gets a little confusing. When you look at the DAZN numbers for Matchroom USA LLC, those revenues don't show up in Matchroom Boxing Limited in the UK. What shows up is only the distributions of profit, the profit share distributions, which is just a couple $1 million. So when you put those together, as we did on a previous episode, we talked about they were showing, I think in 2022, about maybe 300 million in total revenue in US dollars. Now it would be interesting to see if if the DAZN money that they've lost, that plummeted, if it's been replaced by Saudi money, because we'll see it in the overseas money revenue for Matchroom Boxing UK.
Bearing that in mind, what do you think their next 5 years looks like?
Well, I mean, can they turn it around? My guess would be in the next 5 years. I just don't think the Spotify of sports is a winning formula. It's hard to see that this is at least in the American market. I do not see a quick, easy fix. But who knows? I mean, the thing that we keep an eye on is what happens in Australia and these other territories with FIFA and these other properties they're putting tons of money in. Can they convert that to subscribers and revenue? I'm suspicious. I would suspect no, because it does not seem like they're either going in the wrong direction or have made no progress in their business venture. But again, we will find out another year or two. You look at their finances, we will look at it like, man, you were just blowing more money, Len. Or it's like, oh, it looked like you turned the page in some of these territories, turned the corner in some of these territories. I suspect, though, we're in a long, winding road where eventually this will be sold off and acquired by someone else at a discount. That's my suspicion, but I could be wrong.
All right. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit, but similar, because DAZN airs some of this, and we're going to talk about Bare Knuckle FC. Now, Bare Knuckle FC just had this big show in Philly this past weekend. We saw Eddie Alvarez get his jaw literally cracked in half. And they had like tremendous gate success. But there's a problem with Bare Knuckle FC, and that's Triller. Can you first tell me and this is obviously going to be an estimation, but would you estimate that Bare Knuckle FC is a successful company overall?
Well, I mean, somewhat successful. We have some of their finances from the Triller finances. Mm-hmm. We know in last year in 2023, I believe it was. Yeah, 2023, according to their filing earlier this year from Triller, that the total revenue for Bare Knuckle BKFC was $8.3 million and cost of revenues was $12.1 million. So that's a loss of almost $4 million. But they're a growing venture, and you could lose money, and it's not bad because you could be spending the money on infrastructure, your capital expenditures to grow the company. So, may I
ask one thing?
Yes.
Is that ratio of loss to profit? Is that a decent one? If you're going to be losing, is that a small window, a big one? I mean, tell me how that looks.
I mean, I have no clue I don't have a breakdown of their individual expenditures is, because you could have a one-time expense. You could have something where you hired someone, you had to pay an amount, or you still expect to have losses for a period and then growth to follow. I mean, it's kind of hard to say, but okay. My point is it's not shocking that a new startup that's growing saw some losses. Okay. Now, you'd want to see the trend lines to see where this is headed and see what's potentially in the future, because they could be. Here's an example. You could be, although this is obviously not the example, because they had a decrease last year in how much was attributed to fighter costs of $1.8 million. So the fighter costs got lower. But let's just say you're on a TV deal that doesn't pay much, but you sign a bunch of top fighters and pay them a lot more than what the TV deal covers, because this TV deal is just going to come to an end soon. You're going to get a much bigger TV deal if you have top fighters. So you might lose money paying these people a bunch of money to stay in your promotion, even though technically you can't afford them, because the next deal you'll recoup it in the next deal. And that's why, promoters are repeat players. They can lose in the short term to win in the long term. So I wouldn't read too much into those losses, but I'm just pointing out that that's their revenue for BKFC that they showed last year for the full year. And then for the first 9 months this year, they had they had some promotional stuff. We don't know their exact revenue, their finances for the first 9 months, but we see some stuff like promotional fees and stuff like that. But there's things about Triller I find a little concerning.
What's that? Because that was going to be my next question is, first, what exactly is their link to Triller and to DAZN? Because I'm a little confused that both seem to be platforms for them.
Yeah, well, the DAZN is they're linked to them. They signed a deal in September, I believe, last year for a 3-year deal on the DAZN platform. I don't know if that's the best choice, but that's where they're at right now. But what makes me nervous about Triller is, one, they finally went public last fall after 4 tries at an IPO. Their stock plummeted overnight. As soon as it went public, it started, I think it was introduced at a price of $23.76. Right now, it stands about $1.72.
Oh, my.
So that price has just collapsed. They also have a couple lawsuits against them. There's a investment manager, Yorkville Advisors, has filed documents with the Supreme Court of New York. End of November last year, claiming that they required to pay, that they defaulted on a loan to them. So there's that. There was that's one. So they have that loan, and that was a convertible note, I believe, that loan. So it's not like a great loan they got. They borrowed $33.5 million from them, and that loan note comes with 18% interest. So that's $16,000 a day. That's super high interest. So that's one thing. And then on top of that, you also have the fact that back in December, a board member resigned. Kevin McGregor resigned from the board of Triller. And I think so you lose that. You add that up, and their stock price, they seem to be making some, they have some convertible notes and other loans that make me a little nervous that there might be distressed. And there's also, at the same time, BKFC has also had some taken out some convertible notes that they took out 2 notes last year, 2 loans, one for $2.4 million. No, not last year, 2023 and 2024. They took out 2 loans, 2 promissory notes, one for $2.4 million and one for $7.9 million. They've made repayments to them of $4.2 million and 0. So right now the total outstanding is $5.1 and $900,000, which are currently outstanding, but they bear an interest of 20%. So I don't know the current status of these loans, if they're paying that, but that is, I guess for more details, but you add that together and it's not filling me with a ton of enthusiasm for the Triller product. Let's put it that way. And for BKFC,
wait, because I have to ask. I asked you to tell me the link from DAZN to BKFC and Triller. What is Triller's link to BKFC? How are they linked?
Well, Triller, I should have explained this. I'm sorry. I thought everybody here was just an insider and knew the full details of Triller and BKFC. But BKFC back in 2022 acquired, not BKFC, Triller back in 2022 acquired BKFC. For I think $500,000 in cash, and the rest is stock options, and so they acquired them. So they're the owner of the parent company of Triller.
I mean of BKFC.
Oh, BKFC. Thank you for correcting me. Of BKFC. So that's their connection. So you have this company BKFC that may or may not be doing great, and that their owner says they're doing great. They just did 17,000. On the outset, it does look like they're seeing growth, and they probably are doing good. But they're part of a company that has seen plummeting stocks, that has seen a lot of questions about this IPO and their merger with this Hong Kong company, Agba. Just has a lot of questions, and looks like I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to create rumors, but just on the outside looking in, it does look like their capital raise for Triller and even BKFC seems a little bit like they're capital constrained, like they're distressed. They need money. That's just for me. I'm just saying it just has that appearance. And so it makes me feel, it raises some concern on my part when you add all that together.
All right. I need you to fire up your Speculatron 9000 because I've got 2 questions for you that require it. First, I'd like you to give me your outlook for Triller for just 2 years. And then I want you to give me your outlook for Bare Knuckle FC for that same 2 years, since they're intrinsically linked.
I mean, for Triller, I wouldn't be shocked if the SEC the feds invade them one day. I'm being a little facetious. No one come after me right there. But I'm being a little serious because I have questions about their finances when they went public. And I do not, I'm not filled with, I do not think they're a company long for this world. They just do not look at their finances. They're still losing money. They are not, their revenue 9-month ending just recently was like only 33 million for Triller last 9 months and their losses, while smaller than it used to be, was still over 100 million in losses. So, and it's ongoing. So it does not, they're supposed to be the TikTok rival. And there's nothing there that says they are a competitor for TikTok. I think their best hope is, and I don't even think they're up for acquisition by anyone. So they're not a company to me that looks like they're long for this world. Now, BKFC, Triller might be in trouble, but BKFC, there does seem to be a fan base. There does seem to be interest. I think we exaggerate somewhat how big they are because we are in the MMA bubble and because people bored with MMA have latched onto it. I do not see bare knuckle boxing from my personal opinion does not have a high ceiling for growth. So I don't think it's going to be the next big thing, but it does look like as a promotion, they sell. I mean, they did 12, even if they did 8 million and growing, they are selling, they are making some money. So there's some success there. So I don't think Triller might be in trouble. I could see this again, just my guess looking in the future, just taking a wild guess. I have no real knowledge. I'm just guessing. I could see BKFC surviving being spun off. Although, I don't know what their financial situation will look like at that point.
Would you say that BKFC is hampered, their growth would be hampered because they can't, there's no ranking system, so there's no way really to figure out who the top dogs are outside of the champions?
Well, I mean, the reason I think it's limited is because it's nothing like a real sport. One is it's incredibly bloody. Mm-hmm. Two is you watch the events and who headlines them stuff. These are washouts from MMA. It's basically a form of it's a spectacle of watching people you might recognize from MMA fight, return, and get in a bloody fight, and also a bunch of people you probably never heard of on the undercard get knocked out because there seems to be a high rate of knockout. So it's not like there's nothing here that says these are the best in the world of a large body of bare knuckle fighters, right? Mm-hmm. Boxing, of course, massive amount of amateurs, huge amount of pros around the world. You're interested in the top. MMA, a smaller pool of MMA fighters. There's no Olympics, but we have large numbers coming over from other sports, judo, kickboxing, wrestling, that compete at the highest level. So there's a somewhat of a feeder system. For bare knuckle, it's basically, are you a known commodity that's no longer good at MMA? That seems to be, and so rankings, I think that would even hurt it. If you actually tried to make it more like a sport, because you would lose what the fan base seems to like, which is watching people get the shit kicked out of them and knocked out.
All right. So we're going to stick with bare knuckle for a second, and we're going to go back for a second to DAZN, because our next question sort of combines the two. Now, somebody on Twitter noted that DAZN gave bare knuckle a ton of coverage this past weekend, but barely any to the PFL, who also held a show. And that person wondered if perhaps Bare Knuckle FC might have a new deal coming up. So what's your take on that?
Well, Bare Knuckle just signed a deal with DAZN in September of last year for 3 years, I believe. And PFL also signed a deal with DAZN last July, I believe, for 3 years as well. Exclusive deal everywhere outside the U.S. was the deal, just excluding the U.S., which is, I think they're hoping to get another major deal. Now, maybe there's option clauses, because I know PFL is looking for a big deal after the UFC signs. So maybe there's some clauses in it that they can switch to another broadcaster. But I really don't know why they were promoting BKFC and not PFL. Outside the fact is maybe because we're in the United States and we're talking to people on social media, mostly from the United States, and they're seeing the promotion because BKFC is on DAZN in the United States, where for PFL, it's only the international rights that DAZN holds. So maybe they weren't pushing it as much to the American audience.
Okay. I just want to shout out Into the Void. He is at Aaron __ 2 underscores 1988. He's the guy that questioned that. So I just want to give him.
Yeah. And I should note a couple things. One is, as you know, I have absolutely no interest in BKFC.
I know.
So
I don't either, but I just happen to catch lots of the conversation in our feed.
Well, and also someone told me about the Triller and BKFC finances, and I did not ask for permission to share his name, so I'm not going to share his name. I'll find out. But hats off to, he knows who he is. I hate the dude. He drives me nuts, but I'm actually kidding. He's a fine dude. But he shared me the Triller information because, as you know, I don't follow Triller at all. I don't follow BKFC, and so I have to give hats off to someone else for filling me on the details. A lot of the problems are running.
And also, we're really sorry that John can't seem to keep his microphone steady because he is beating it up right now.
That's, you know what? That's not me. There's someone walking around here that keeps
Isla is walking around on the desk. That's what it is.
Yeah, bunting their head into it every once in a while.
So while we're here on the PFL, is there any interesting news that came out of that show this past weekend?
Speaking of the devil, there was. Don Davis was in an interview, and he had just a brief mention that the PFL purses for their tournaments next year, the season, will total over $20 million. Now, I mean, that doesn't sound like a massive amount compared to like the UFC, but $20 million is a sizable amount because we're talking about 56 total fights in those tournaments. There's eight tournaments, 8 fighters per tournament. So 4 fights in the first round for each one, 2 in the second, 1 in the third. Add them up. That's 56 fights total, 112 purses. So that would come out to basically about $200,000 average per purse paid during those tournaments. And you compare it to what they paid, at least what the information we know about what they're paying on their seasons before, which had 6 weight classes, but when you add in the first what do you call it, the regular season, goddamn regular season for MMA, Jesus, the regular season before the playoffs, that totaled almost an identical number of fights and probably paid less than half that amount. So the total amount being paid is not smaller per fight. It looks like it's growing. And then you add in stuff like we know Ngannou's getting about $10 million a fight. We know his opponent's getting $2 million. They have a championship series. So you add that in, and if Ngannou fights once next year, it would not be shocking if PFL had $40 or $50 million in total purses for fighters when you add up the championship series, especially if they retain a bunch of the Bellator guys and pay them. Now, the caveat is that might probably be a reason why they're shedding a lot of these Bellator guys to save on some of the money there on those matches. So, that 40 or 50 million could decrease a bit if they get rid of a bunch of the Bellator fighters who are making more money. At least several of them are making pretty good money for MMA terms.
Why do you think that the PFL shows overseas seem to do so much better than their US shows? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Okay, the face!